7th edition ServSafe Manager, Chapter 1, Providing Safe Food. A foodborne illness at a local cafe. Dozens of people become sick at a small cafe, and guests who ate the cafe's famous baked potato salad called to complain of nausea and vomiting. Those calls began within 2 days after eating the dish. Guests eventually experienced double vision and difficulty in speaking and swallowing. The local regulatory authorities investigated. They found that the baked potatoes and the salad were the source of the outbreak. The potatoes had been wrapped in aluminum foil when they were baked. Then they were left on a prep table overnight to cool. Ultimately, the potatoes were left at room temperature for almost 18 hours before they were used in the salad. Bacteria on the potatoes had the correct conditions for growth. Now, reflecting on this local cafe story, can you prevent this? The guests became sick because the staff at the cafe did not know that baked potatoes might contain bacteria. When the staff did not handle the potatoes with care, bacteria on the potatoes grew to high levels. Preventing foodborne illness like this is one of our most important tasks as a manager. This chapter will introduce you to some basic concepts and principles for keeping food safe. Let's enter into this reading with the following questions in mind. What is a foodborne illness and what is a foodborne illness outbreak? What are TCS and ready-to-eat foods? What are the 5 risk factors for foodborne illness? Which populations have a higher risk for foodborne illness? How can you help keep food safe in your operation? And what are the roles of government agencies to keep food safe? Foodborne illnesses. Being a food service manager is not easy. You have responsibilities to your operation, your staff, and your customers. The best way to meet your responsibilities is to keep the food you serve safe. To start, you must learn what food illnesses are and the challenges you will face to preventing them. You simply cannot afford challenges you will face in preventing them. Sorry about that. To start, you must learn what foodborne illnesses are and the challenges you will face in preventing them. You simply cannot afford not to. The cost of a foodborne illness outbreak can be devastating. So what are the challenges to food safety? A foodborne illness is a disease transmitted to people by food. An illness is considered an outbreak when 2 or more people have the same symptoms after eating the same food. An investigation is conducted by local and state regulatory authorities. The outbreak is confirmed by laboratory analysis. So each year, millions of people get sick from unsafe food. Food service operations work hard to minimize foodborne illnesses, and as a result of these efforts, foodborne illnesses have declined in recent years. However, operations still face many challenges in food safety. Some challenges are time. Because of pressure to work quickly, we can make it hard to take time to follow food safety practices. Another challenge is language and culture. Your staff may speak a different language than you do, and this can make it difficult to communicate. Cultural differences can also influence how food handlers view food safety. Another challenge can be literacy and education. Staff often have different levels of education, and this can make it more challenging to teach them food safety. The challenge of pathogens. They are illness-causing microorganisms more frequently found in types of food that once were considered safe. We also have the challenge of unapproved suppliers. Food that is received from suppliers that are not practicing food safety can cause foodborne illness outbreak. The challenge of high-risk customers. The number of customers at high risk for getting a foodborne illness is increasing. An example of this is the growing elderly population. We even face the challenge of staff turnover. Training new staff, as shown on the picture on the left, leaves us less time for food safety training. The ServSafe program will provide you with the tools you need to overcome the challenges in managing a good food safety program. Now let's consider on page 1.3 the cost of a foodborne illness. Foodborne illnesses cost the United States billions of dollars each year. The National Restaurant Association figures show that one foodborne illness can cost an operation thousands of dollars. It can even result in closure. Some of these costs are shown right here on this table 1.1. It covers the loss of customers and sales, negative media exposure, lawsuits and legal fees, increased insurance premiums, loss of wages or reputation, lowered staff morale, staff missing work, and even staff retraining. But most importantly are the costs to humans. Victims of foodborne illnesses may experience the following. They could experience loss of work, they could experience medical costs, long-term disability, and even death. So let's consider, how does a foodborne illness occur? Unsafe food is usually a result of contamination, which is the presence of harmful substances in food. To prevent foodborne illness, you must recognize the contaminants that can make food unsafe. This can come from pathogens, chemicals, or physical objects. They may also come from certain unsafe practices in your operation. So these contaminants are divided into 3 categories that you will want to memorize. They are the biological, chemical, and physical contaminants. Biological contaminants are pathogens. Pathogens are the greatest threat to food safety. They include certain viruses, parasites, fungus, and bacteria, as shown here on the left. Some plants, like mushrooms and seafood that carry harmful toxins or poisons, are also included in the biological group. Moving down, chemical. Food service chemicals can contaminate if they are used incorrectly. The photo on the left shows one example of how chemicals may contaminate food. Chemical contaminants can include cleaners, sanitizers, and even polishes. And last on page 1.4 are physical contaminants. Physical, foreign objects such as metal shavings, staples, and bandages can get into food. So can glass, dirt, and even bag ties. The photo on the left shows this type of physical contaminant. Naturally occurring objects such as fish bones and fillets are another example. Each of these contaminants is a danger to food and food safety, but biological contaminants are responsible for most of our foodborne illness. How food becomes unsafe. If food handlers do not handle food correctly, it can become unsafe. These are the 5 most common food handling mistakes or risk factors that can cause a foodborne illness. Number 1, purchasing food from unsafe sources. Number 2, failing to cook food correctly. Number 3, holding food at incorrect temperatures. Number 4, using contaminated equipment. And number 5, practicing poor personal hygiene. So team, purchasing food from unsafe sources can be a big problem. So purchasing food from approved, reputable suppliers is critical. This will be discussed in greater detail later. Keep in mind that food prepared in a private home is also considered to be from an unsafe source and must be avoided. The other food handling mistakes listed are related to 4 main practices. These include time and temperature abuse, cross-contamination, poor personal hygiene, and poor cleaning and sanitation. These will be identified in Table 1.2 on the following page. But first, let's stop and think about it. So, more than 30 children experienced dizziness, nausea, and vomiting after eating spaghetti at an elementary school cafeteria. According to the regulatory authority, the spaghetti was not heated correctly on the day it was served. It also was not cooled correctly when it was prepared the day before. The cafeteria had to be closed so staff could be retrained on safe food handling practices. So this story is already discussing some things right here, right? So failing to failing to cook food correctly. They didn't bring it up to a high enough temperature, which we'll talk about later. And then holding food at the incorrect temperature. I don't know what their steam table was at, but here I'll just point it out because if they didn't cool it down properly, then they allowed pathogens to grow, right? They didn't take care of that step. So let's discuss Table 1.2, practices related to a foodborne illness. Time temperature abuse is a big deal in the food industry and even at home. Time temperature abuse. Food has suffered time temperature abuse when it has stayed too long at temperatures that are good for the growth of pathogens. A foodborne illness can result if food is time temperature abused, and this can happen in many ways. For example, listed here in these 3 bullet points, food that is not held or stored at correct temperature is also on the photo on the left. We should also consider food that is not cooked or reheated enough to kill its pathogens, or food that is not cooled correctly, i.e. letting pathogens grow while it cools. Next down here, we'll discuss cross-contamination. Cross-contamination are when pathogens can be transferred from one surface to another surface. This is called cross-contamination. It can cause a foodborne illness in many ways. First, contaminated ingredients are added to a food that receives no further cooking. There's a way for cross-contamination. We can cross-contaminate ready-to-eat food when it touches contaminated surface. So it's like a sandwich that's ready to eat. It touches a dirty cutting board, cross-contamination. Contaminated food that touches or drips fluids onto cooked or ready-to-eat food. So in this little photo here, they're showing lettuce, which is ready-to-eat food, right? It doesn't require any cooking. And then something raw, like I think that would be blood of some sort, dripped on it. So that is now cross-contaminated. A food handler could touches contaminated food and then touches ready-to-eat food. All right. So food handler goes into the cooler here, sees this, touches the blood, goes and tells somebody about it, but then doesn't wash their hands and now touches the sandwiches to be prepared. They just cross-contaminated. And also we can cross-contaminate with contaminated wiping cloths that touch food contact surfaces, okay? Here, one of the biggest culprits to practices related to foodborne illnesses is poor personal hygiene. Food handlers can cause a foodborne illness if they do any of the following actions. Poor personal hygiene is represented when you fail to wash your hands correctly after using the restroom. Poor personal hygiene is represented when you cough or sneeze on food. Poor personal hygiene is represented when you touch or scratch wounds and then touch food, as shown in the photo on the left. But hey, above and beyond that, how about when you touch your face, scratch your hair, scratch yourself? That is all poor personal hygiene. And poor personal hygiene is represented when we work sick. All right. Practices related to foodborne illness, poor cleaning and sanitizing. So pathogens can be spread to food if equipment has not been cleaned and sanitized correctly between uses. This can happen in the following ways. Equipment and utensils are not washed, rinsed, and sanitized between uses. So team, a quick rinsey rinse doesn't count. Poor cleaning and sanitizing is represented when food contact surfaces are wiped clean rather than being washed, rinsed, and sanitized, as shown in the photo on the left. Poor cleaning and sanitizing is represented when wiping cloths are not stored in sanitizer solution between uses. And poor cleaning and sanitizing is represented when sanitizing solutions are not at the required levels to sanitize objects. Now let's take a second and apply our knowledge. I'll remind you, do not write in your book, okay? So, apply your knowledge. What's the cause? Make a mental note next to the 5 most common causes of foodborne illnesses, okay? So what do we got? Purchasing foods from unsafe sources. Should you put a check next to it? Number 2, allowing pests to enter the operation. Was that listed as most common causes of foodborne illness? Number 3, should you put an X next to failing to cook food correctly? Number 4, should you put an X next to failing to rotate food during storage? Number 5, should you put an X next to using contaminated equipment? 6, holding food at incorrect temperatures. 7, practicing poor personal hygiene. 8, failing to store dry food correctly. All right, so if you look at that and you have your notebook next to you and you wrote down page 1.7, apply your knowledge, and you write down the numbers that you would put an X next to, okay? That's your apply your knowledge activity. Do not write in the book, but write down and think about these answers in your notebook. Moving forward to food most likely to become unsafe. Get out your notebook again. This is a great spot to take notes. TCS and ready-to-eat food are the most likely types of food to become unsafe. TCS food. Pathogens grow well in TCS food. These items need time and temperature control to limit pathogen growth. For this reason, this food is called TCS food. Time and temperature at the T, control for the C, S is for safety. TCS food is food requiring time and temperature control for safety. TCS food is shown on table 1.3 on the following page. So our examples of TCS food is listed here. Now, as you go through them, I want you to pause and think of a food in that subset, right? So let's go through milk and dairy products. They got nice lists of milk and dairy products, right? But team, if I use milk in my biscuit mix, then that food is a TCS food until I bake it because it has milk in it. So just think of things like that if things are raw with dairy products, right? Or like through here, cottage cheese, that's a dairy product. Moving down the list, meat. Meat is classified as beef, pork, and lamb, okay? So anything within those categories, ground, whole, raw meats are all, and cooked meats are all foods that need time and temperature control for safety, TCS. Fish is in that category. So anything you catch out of a Minnesota lake or out in the ocean is in this category. Whole ground fish, and then even once it's cooked, it's still a TCS food, okay? Baked potatoes fall into the TCS category here. So don't forget that. They have a tight layer around them, which can cause risks, and we'll get more into that in the future. Now, here we are seeing tofu or other soy proteins, okay? So synthetic meats that are soy-based are definitely TCS foods. We'll want to protect them from time and temperature abuse so that we can have our best food experiences with our tofu products and our soy products. Now, we want to talk about sliced or cut produce, okay? So if I have a cantaloupe sitting out on the counter in my restaurant or even at home and a blade has not been passed through it, it is fine. As soon as I pass a blade through my melon, through my tomato, through my bell pepper, through my spinach or my head of iceberg lettuce, as soon as the blade passes through it, it is now TCS food. It has been opened up and compromised to allow pathogens to grow. So now that sliced produce is a TCF food. Moving up here to shelled eggs, except those that are treated to remove salmonella, are a TCS food. So what does that mean? If I bring eggs out of the fridge, I need to be mindful of how long I leave them out of the fridge. If I make a recipe that calls for raw egg, then I need to be mindful and control it with time and temperature. Can you think of any recipes that call for a raw egg? We would, in my mind, I think of mayonnaise or a lab that we're going to do together, Caesar dressing. Poultry, okay? So poultry is chicken, poultry is turkey, poultry is pheasant, poultry is even pigeon, all that stuff. So poultry and ground. What about ground turkey? That falls under TCS foods. Shellfish and crustaceans are TCS foods. They need time and temperature control for safety. All right, and then we need to think about cooked plant-based food, okay? So we need to, if I cook this broccoli or a rice or say a big old amount of beans, as soon as I cook that, it is now a TCS food and it will require time and temperature control for safety. Time and temperature control for safety foods includes sprouts and sprout seeds, bean sprouts, alfalfa sprouts, think of things like that. Those require time and temperature control for safety. Pathogens love to triple and double on bean sprouts. And then the last thing here that they're showing you, which might be a little less familiar, would be untreated garlic and garlic oils. But that is still something you need to keep in mind. So what they're saying here is if I get a liter of olive oil and I put a garlic clove inside of it, and I put some fresh thyme leaf in it, and maybe a fresh basil leaf in order to infuse this oil with flavor. Because it has not been pasteurized or heat up to kill pathogens, I am at risk of allowing pathogens to grow if I just let this oil sit on the counter. So if I want to infuse my oil, I need to put that in the fridge. Okay. And that's something you may not think about, right? Because oil is generally always allowed out on the counter. Now moving on to straight reading. Ready to eat food. Like TCS food, so TCS food, ready to eat food also needs careful handling to prevent contamination. Ready to eat food is exactly what it sounds like. Food that can be eaten without any further preparation, washing, or cooking. Ready to eat food includes cooked food, washed fruit and vegetables, whole and cut. It includes deli meat too. Bakery items and sugar, spices, and seasoning are also included in ready-to-eat food categories. Now, what populations are at high risk for foodborne illness? Certain groups of people have a higher risk of getting a foodborne illness. And they are listed here on this table. So, high-risk populations include elderly, preschool-aged children, and people with compromised immune systems. Okay, so what qualifies as an elderly person? As young people, everybody's probably elderly, right? So let's really give this a definition. Elderly people, elderly people are people's immune systems weaken with age, and the immune system is the body's defense against illness. Elderly people are generally considered 65 and older. Preschool age children are very young children and they have not built up a strong enough immune system. Preschool age children are 5 and under. People with compromised immune systems. Now, certain medical conditions and medications can weaken a person's immune system. And those people can include people undergoing cancer or chemotherapies, people with HIV/AIDS, or even people that have had a transplant. Apply your knowledge. All right, team. Again, get out your notebook, write down page 1.10, apply your knowledge. Go ahead and list out, write the word, which is it like, and then give me the numbers that you would write an X next to the food that needs time and temperature control for safety. So, will you write an X next to chopped lettuce? Will you write an X next to sliced watermelon? Will you write an X next to dried rice? Would you write an X next to flour? Would you write an X next to cooked carrots? Or would you write an X next to cheese? So go ahead and tell me what needs time and temperature control for safety within this list. Write those numbers down. Now go ahead. Who is at greater risk? Write an X next to each group that has the greater risk of getting foodborne illness because of their immune system. So tell me 1 through 6 here. Would you write an X next to school teachers? Would you write an X next to college students? Would you write an X next to preschool students? Would you write an X next to healthcare providers? Would you write an X next to transplant recipients or nursing home residents? Go ahead and write down your selection there on your notebook. Just write the numbers. Moving forward to page 1.11, keeping food safe. Now that you know how food can become unsafe, you can use this knowledge to keep food safe and focus on these measures: purchasing from approved, reputable suppliers, controlling time and temperature, preventing cross-contamination, practicing personal hygiene, cleaning and sanitizing. Team, these are the things you can control. So set up standard operating procedures that focus on these areas. This ServSafe program will show you how to design these procedures in later chapters. In training and monitoring. So as a manager, your job is more than just understanding food safety practices and creating the necessary procedures. You also must train your staff to follow these procedures, as shown in the photo to the right. Staff should be trained when they are first hired and on an ongoing basis. Your entire staff needs general food safety knowledge. Other knowledge will be specific to the task performed on the job. For example, everyone needs to know the correct way to wash their hands. However, only receiving staff need to know how to inspect produce during receiving. Staff need to be retrained in food safety regularly. When a food handler completes training, you need to document it. Once staff is trained, monitor them to make sure they are following procedures. And at times, you may notice employees doing tasks incorrectly. Each incorrect task could lead to an increase in risk. And when this happens, it's important to correct the situation immediately. This is called corrective action. If an employee often completes a task incorrectly, or if multiple employees complete a task incorrectly, they should be retrained. Government agencies responsible for the prevention of foodborne illnesses. Several government agencies take leading roles in the prevention of foodborne illness in the United States. The Food and Drug Administration, or the FDA, and the U.S. Department of Agriculture, the USDA, inspect food and perform other critical duties. State and local regulatory authorities create regulations and inspect operations, and as shown on the photo on the left. Here in Minnesota, that would be the Minnesota Department of Health. Agencies such as the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the CDC, and the U.S. Public Health Service, PHS, help with food safety as well. The FDA inspects all food except for meat, poultry, and eggs. The agency also regulates foods transported across state lines. In addition, the FDA issues the Food Code. This science-based code provides recommendations for food safety regulations. The Food Code was created for city, county, state, and tribal agencies. These agencies regulate food service for the following groups. So what they're saying is the FDA wrote the Food Code for the Minnesota Department of Health to use to write their regulations for for restaurants and retail food stores, vending operations, schools and daycare centers, and hospitals and nursing homes. Now, although the FDA recommends that states adopt the food code, it cannot require it. The FDA also provides technical support and training, and this is available for industry and regulatory agencies. Now let's think about some other agencies out there. So several other agencies have an important role in food safety and the prevention of foodborne illness. The USDA, or the U.S. Department of Agriculture, regulates and inspects meat, poultry, and eggs. And the USDA also regulates food that crosses state boundaries or involves more than one state. The CDC and the Public Health Service, these agencies assist our FDA and USDA and Minnesota Department of Health. They conduct research into the causes of foodborne illness outbreaks. They also assist in investigating the outbreaks. Here are state and local regulatory authorities. The Minnesota Department of Health. Regulatory authorities write or adopt codes that regulate retail food service operations. The codes may differ from FDA food code because these agencies are not required to adopt it. Regulatory authorities may have responsibilities. Here are some of the responsibilities related to food safety. So they inspect operations, enforce regulations, they investigate complaints and illnesses, they issue license and permits, they approve construction, and they review and approve HACCP plans. New vocab there, we'll cover that later. Here we get to apply our knowledge again. Don't write on your book. Get out your notebook page, write down 1.13, apply your knowledge, who does what? 1 through 5, and then behind 1 through 5, I want you to write down who does what, the FDA, USDA, CDC, or state and local health departments, okay? So Who writes the codes that regulate retail and food service operations? Number one. Number two, who conducts research into the causes of foodborne illness outbreaks? Number three, who inspects meat, poultry, and eggs? Number four, who writes the food code? Number five, who inspects retail and food service operations? In summary, a foodborne illness is a disease transmitted to people by food. An illness is considered an outbreak when 2 or more people have the same symptoms after eating the same food. TCS and ready-to-eat food are especially at risk for contamination. TCS food is food that needs time and temperature control for safety. Ready-to-eat food is food that can be eaten without further preparation, washing, or cooking. There are 5 common risk factors that can cause a foodborne illness. These include purchasing from unsafe sources, failing to cook food correctly, holding food at the incorrect temperatures, using contaminated equipment, practicing poor personal hygiene. And the risk factors are related to these unsafe practices of time and temperature abuse, cross-contamination, poor personal hygiene, and poor personal cleaning and sanitation. There are some groups at higher risk of getting sick from unsafe food. They include preschool-age children, elderly people, and people with compromised immune systems. Certain medical conditions and medications can compromise a person's immune system. This includes cancer, chemotherapy, HIV/AIDS, and transplants. Important prevention measures for keeping food safe are controlling time and temperature, preventing cross-contamination, practicing good personal hygiene, purchasing from approved reputable suppliers, and cleaning and sanitizing items correctly. Training your staff to follow safe food handling procedures. Train staff when they are hired and retrain them on an ongoing basis. Watch to make sure they follow procedures. If you see unsafe food handling practices, take corrective action to keep food safe. Retrain employees as needed. Federal, state, and local governments have a role in keeping food safe. The FDA issues the food code. The FDA, USDA, and state and local regulatory authorities regulate operations. These authorities issue operating permits and license for operations and have other responsibilities. The CDC and PHS conduct research and investigations related to food safety. So that's a really nice review, a really great place to double check that you have these things in your notes. Now, a chapter review case study. We're going to be asking, when we're done reading this, what did Lucas do wrong? And what should Lucas have done? Okay, so go ahead and write down in your notebook, page 1.5, 1.15. Number 1, what did Lucas do wrong? And leave a little space, some space, whatever. 2, what should Lucas have done? That way, as I read through here, you can go ahead and maybe start jotting down what did Lucas do wrong. Take care, though, that you're not busy writing and you can't even hear me anymore. All right. Chapter review case study, chapter 1, page 1.15. Food safety is important to every food service operation, and the cost of a foodborne illness outbreak can be high. However, you can avoid outbreaks by recognizing the importance of food safety, recognizing how food can become unsafe, identifying the risks associated with high-risk populations, training and monitoring staff, and following the keys to food safety. Now you can take what you have learned in this chapter and apply it to the following case study. Lucas was not happy because he was working by himself. His coworker called in sick, and they were experiencing their regular Wednesday night group of softball players. Lucas was not feeling too well himself, and on top of this, the large group canceled at the last minute. Unfortunately, Lucas had already started cooking a dozen burgers on the grill. Lucas finished cooking the hamburger patties until they were well done, and then he put them in a pan on the counter. Maybe someone will order a burger later, he thought. Because there were no customers yet, he made a quick run to the restroom. When he was finished, he wiped his hands on his apron, combed his hair, and headed back to the kitchen. 20 minutes later, Lucas got his first customers of the evening. They were an elderly man and his 4-year-old granddaughter. Lucas was happy when they ordered a burger to share. "Cook it medium," the man said. It looked like the pre-made burgers would stay on the counter for a while. Lucas went back to the kitchen and put a fresh patty on the grill. Then he wiped off the cutting board he had used earlier for prepping raw chicken. He sliced the tomatoes and onion. When the burger was just past medium rare, he plated it up. Now, what did Lucas do wrong, and what should he have done differently? Take some time and contemplate that and really think about it. It'll help all of these things really solidify or set up in your brain, okay? Moving forward, I would ask you to go ahead and write in your notebook your page 1.16 case study questions. You go ahead and write 1 through 10, leaving space for your your alphabetical answer behind it through your questions. And then write in your notebooks your A, B, C, or D choice as you go through the questions. Okay? Now what I want you to do then is on page 1.18 and 1.19 is review your work. Now, can you just jump to here and get the answers and cheat? Yeah. Will that do you any good? 0. So as you work through the chapter, I hope you worked through these questions on your own. Now look down at your notebook and correct yourself. If you were incorrect, now you have, I want you to go back and figure out where you were wrong and readjust your thought, especially in your study questions. Did you get that wrong? Oops, no big deal. I can readjust my thought here, right here and now, because I can correct this, okay?